Thank you. Senator O'Neill. We've moved to questions without notice. First question. I'll let senators take their seat and call Senator Sheldon.
My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. Virgin Australia CEO Jane Hardlick has warned that jobs of 3,000 workers will be at risk when the Morrison government ends JobKeeper in March. Why is the Morrison government turning its back on 3,000 Australians?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. The Morrison government has proudly stood by all Australians through the last 12 months of globally unprecedented uncertainty. We have faced the most extraordinary of times in terms of the health threat to our nation and in terms of the economic threat to the livelihoods of many of Australians and to the businesses of many Australians. And what we have done through that time, and I acknowledge often with bipartisan support, what we've done through that time is to be able to, in working closely with states and territories, authorities around the country, be able to secure the lives and save the lives of many Australians, and to be able to protect the livelihoods of many Australians and of many Australian businesses. And we've done that by acting at all times according to clearly defined principles that we laid out at the outset of the pandemic, to make sure that when economic support was delivered, it was targeted, it was proportionate and it was temporary. And we have responded, as the circumstances have improved through the course of the pandemic, to ensure that we deliver support according to those principles. And indeed, when it came to the creation of JobKeeper, we created it. When it came to the extension of it, we extended it. But also at the point of extension, we heeded messages, including from the Leader of the Opposition, that there needed to be a tapering of it before it was withdrawn. And so we applied a tapering of it. And we will respond in the lead-up to March according to all of the evidence and analysis that is available at that time, to look carefully and closely about what types of additional support, if any, are necessary across the Australian economy, in addition to those that will continue to deliver significant economic support.
The answer has expired. Senator Sheldon, a supplementary question.
Ms Hardlick has also said that Virgin Australia may be forced, and I quote, to make tough decisions on how many people we can afford to keep on the books. When JobKeeper ends in 52 days, how many more aviation jobs will be lost as a result of Mr Morrison's stubborn refusal to act?
Senator Birmingham.
Mr President, thousands of jobs have been saved by actions through this pandemic. Many thousands of jobs have been saved as a result of actions through the pandemic. But we were also honest at the outset. I remember saying this myself. I remember former Senator Cormann saying it. I know that those in the other place did as well. Not every job and not every business would be able to be saved. And indeed, the pandemic is creating structural changes around the world as well. Not all aspects of previous economic activity are going to come back the way they were beforehand. And so difficult decisions will be made by different businesses facing those structural challenges. But we will continue to respond with support in the Australian economy when and where it's appropriate.
I appreciate the minister. It hasn't stopped. Point of order, direct relevance. The question does go not to jobs across the economy, which the minister is referring to, but how many more aviation jobs will be lost as a result of the government's refusal to act?
Senator Wong, I think you, with respect, dropped a word there, and I've made the ruling, but there was a word stubborn was in the second part of the question, and I've made a previous ruling that where there are pejorative phrases used, there is a lot more latitude for ministers. I'm making a ruling, Senator Wong. There's a lot more latitude for ministers to address questions broadly when there are pejorative political phrases included in the questions. So in this case, I think the minister is being directly relevant to the question. Senator Birmingham.
Mr President, I was saying we will continue to respond as appropriate to the different circumstances, including in different industries, including the aviation industry, where we have targeted support, and we will continue to look at their unique circumstances.
Senator Sheldon, a final supplementary question.
How many Australians will lose JobKeeper in March and then face losing their jobs or having their wages cut under the Morrison's government's industrial relation changes?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, Mr President, we've provided some $2.7 billion in support across the aviation sector to date, and as I said in response to the last question, we will continue to analyse the circumstances, and we will continue to respond according to the principles we set out, that support should be targeted where it's necessary, should be proportionate to those circumstances, but does also need to be temporary, because the Australian economy can't be run off of endless taxpayer money forever. But these are difficult times, and that's why we've put in place the range of supports that are there. In terms of the industrial relations reforms that we've brought to this parliament, we bring them to this parliament in good faith to make the industrial relations system in Australia more efficient, more effective, in ways to continue to help get more Australians into jobs. And what is remarkable is the policy position that's been taken by those opposite is to say no to all of it. To say no to all of it. Even the bits the unions agreed to, they're now saying no to. They're just anti any type of reform that may help to get Australians back into jobs.
Expired. Order. Order. Order on my right and my left. Senator Askew.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management, Senator Ruston. Can the Minister please update the Senate on yesterday's judgment from the full federal court regarding the Tasmanian Regional Forest Agreement, which ruled in favour of the Commonwealth, Sustainable Timber Tasmania and the State of Tasmania?
The Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and thank Senator Askew for her question and for the interest that all Tasmanian senators in this place have in the fantastic Tasmanian forestry sector, and particularly acknowledge the Assistant Minister responsible for forestry, Senator Duniam, for his fierce advocacy on behalf of this very important sector. Well, yesterday was a milestone for Tasmania, and indeed a milestone for the Australian timber and forestry sector, when the full court ruled that the Tasmanian regional forestry agreements were indeed valid. The decision was in response to efforts by Bob Brown's Foundation to once again try and use the courts in a litigious attempt to shut down Tasmania's world-class forestry industry. And I'd like to echo the words of Assistant Minister Duniam yesterday by saying that this judgment from the full court was a win for Australia's forestry industry. It's a victory for every single forestry worker who now knows that they have a job, not just those in Tasmania but those right across Australia. But it also reaffirms Australian government's commitment and belief in forestry agreements as the best way of imbalancing environmental, economic and social demands of our native forests. It's a milestone victory for forestry, its supporters, and it's an embarrassing loss for Bob Brown. And it is complete with his merchandise campaign that he put out there. They created a slogan, "Best chance in a generation to end native forest logging." Well, indeed, it was a great forest case yesterday. The case proved to be great for forestry. It proved to be great for the jobs that the forestry industry supports. It was great in securing the jobs in the communities that rely on the forestry industry. And it was a great case to draw to the attention of the Australian public the vexatious attitude that the Greens and their supporters have with the Green Lawfare to stop legitimate businesses, legitimate industries and legitimate communities across Australia.
Senator Ruston. Senator Askew, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. So can the Minister please outline what this milestone judgment means for the forest industry, particularly when it comes to providing certainty, investment and jobs across Australia?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, this decision secures the future of Australia's native forestry industry into the future. That's 52,000 workers that are directly employed and to allow them to get back to what they can do best, and that is to manage this renewable resource for the benefit of regional communities that rely on this world-class sector. Our agreements may remain the best way of balancing the environmental, social and economic demands of our native forests, and this judgment provides certainty. It provides certainty for the workers, it provides certainty for the community, it provides certainty for investment, which means that we will continue to be able to have investment jobs into the future. And this judgment, the irony of the ideological fixation on shutting down our native timber sector, this will not stop us using appearance-grade timber. All it will do is mean that people who want appearance-grade timber will buy it from countries who do not have the kind of environmental protections that this country has.
Senator Askew, a final supplementary question.
Thank you. How will the Morrison government continue to build on its support for the many thousands of hard-working men and women in the forestry industry following this judgment?
Senator Ruston.
Well, our government has an absolutely unwavering commitment to our forestry industry, and unequivocally our support for regional forestry agreements as the most effective mechanism by which we can manage and protect our forests. Every tree that is harvested is replanted. Native forestry is sustainable, it's highly regulated, it's well managed, and the court made a decision yesterday that we were right in that fact. But this government supports and backs many, many families who are supported by our forestry sector and the communities that rely on it. We've delivered 9 regional forestry hubs, 3 national institutes. We're implementing our $20 million National Forestry Plan, and we also understand our responsibility in supporting forestry through bushfires. This is the ultimate renewable resource, the ultimate renewable resource. It is something that every Australian should be proud of our forestry sector, instead of continually condemning and using vexatious litigation to try and shut it down.
Senator Whish-Wilson, take a breath when I call your name. I remind senators of what I said yesterday. When I name you individually, I ask you to at least remain orderly for a short period. Senator Green.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Senator Payne. Is the Minister aware of a Tourism Export Council survey revealing that 80% of domestic tour operators will close by September without some kind of government support? Given the devastating impact of COVID-19 on these businesses, will the Minister provide additional support to internationally facing businesses and regions like Far North Queensland?
The Minister representing the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Green for her question on an issue which I think we canvassed some detail of in discussions in the chamber on Tuesday earlier this week. Because, of course, the government has provided significant levels of support, economic support, during COVID-19 through a range of programs. JobKeeper, as the Leader of the Government in the Senate has outlined in his earlier response, small business cash payments of up to $100,000. And what those payments have done, Mr President, is to sustain hundreds of thousands of tourism businesses and tourism jobs across Australia. And as part of our plan to support tourism recovery, we're also providing further targeted assistance to help the tourism sector rebound and to save as many jobs as possible. That is in addition, as I have said earlier this week, that is in addition to our record funding for Tourism Australia of over $231 million in the current financial year, which is being used to directly support the tourism industry. Tourism Australia, which is ramping up domestic marketing campaigns with the phase 2 of the Holiday Here This Year campaign now underway, familiar to many of us from our television screens right now. Tourism Australia also positioning to commence those international marketing campaigns when the time is right. So we outlined in our budget a clear plan for Australia to create jobs and to rebuild our economy, and that includes helping to secure the future of Australia's tourism industry. We provided $50 million for a Recovery for Regional Tourism Fund, which includes regional areas of Queensland, such as those that Senator Green has referred to boost tourism in 9 regions heavily reliant on international tourism. That's a program which will deliver tailored assistance measures to help tourism businesses pivot to the domestic market. Those applications are currently open, Mr President, with eligible applicants able to submit requests for funding until the 30th of September this year. Mr President,
Senator Payne, time for the answer has expired. Senator Green, a supplementary question. Senator Abetz. Senator Green.
Thank you, Mr President. I do have another question. Minister, out of the $659 million that you spruiked on Tuesday, how much of that financial support has actually been received by affected businesses?
Senator Payne.
Mr President, I'll take the detail of that question on notice in terms of, well, Mr President, those opposite may scoff, but I think even they could manage to understand, particularly the Leader of the Opposition in the Senate, that I am in a representational portfolio, and I will provide accurate detail to Senator Green if she wishes for that information. Of course, if she wishes to ask in advance for information in question time, as we do with other senators, then we would be perfectly willing to assist where we can.
Senator Green, a final supplementary question.
Why is Mr Morrison cutting JobKeeper and cutting wages but prioritising taxpayer-funded government advertising, sports rorts and flying an ex-minister around Europe with a private doctor to get a plum posting politics pay check?
Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President. And Senator Green may wish to advise the Leader of the Opposition in the Senate that she's personally withdrawing the opposition support for former Senator Cormann's candidacy for the OECD. I am not aware if that is a decision those opposite have taken, Mr President, but if they have, they should tell the government. They should tell the government, because that would be the good faith thing to do. I won't hold my breath for good faith from those opposite, Mr President, and I won't hold my breath for good faith that stops them misrepresenting this government and the support we have provided to Australian people, Australian businesses and for Australian jobs right through this pandemic.
Order. I am reluctant to interrupt ministers. I will when I can't hear them, but I will start to interrupt and will waste time in question time for the opposition and crossbenchers if there's that much noise in the chamber. Senator Siewert.
Thank you, Mr President. Mr President, my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health in the Senate, Senator Colbeck. Through you, President, the mRNA vaccines like Pfizer and Moderna have yielded strong results in clinical trials and are expected to be much easier to reconfigure to fight the new strains of the COVID-19 vaccine, virus. It's reported that the government is considering investing in mRNA local production. Is this correct? If so, when is the government going to be making an announcement? How much is the government considering investing in building local capacity for the generation of mRNA vaccines?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. As the chamber might be aware, the government has today announced the acquisition of an additional 10,000 doses, 10 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine. I'm careful not to overpromise, Senator. I'm very careful not to overpromise. The time frame for us to, the time frame required for us to ramp up a production capacity of that capacity, Mr President, is quite a considerable one. So considerations of those things are being undertaken, Mr President, but in the interim, what the government has done is to ensure that we have adequate doses of available vaccines with a range of different types, so that we can ensure that we have adequate capacity to vaccinate the Australian community, and of course, where possible, and I'm aware that Senator Payne and Senator Seselja have been engaged in this, to assist our Pacific neighbours. So at this stage, Mr President, we have 40 million doses, based on the announcement this morning of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. We have 53.8 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine, 51 million doses of the Novavax, and we have access to 25.6 million doses from the COVAX facility, Mr President. So we have access to considerable volumes of vaccine, over 100 million doses of vaccine. And so, Mr President, we will continue to ensure that we have the capacity required. I acknowledge that there is capacity to, with the mRNA vaccines, to tweak the vaccines. I'm aware that the producers of those have indicated that they're inclined to do that, but it will take a considerable
Senator
period of
Colbeck,
time to build
time
that
for the
capacity.
answer has expired. Senator Siewert, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Can I, through you, President, ask the Minister representing the Minister, can you confirm if the government is currently in negotiations with any manufacturers or any experts, as reported, for the development of a facility to manufacture mRNA vaccines in Australia? And if so, is it with a view for it to be a publicly owned facility?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks, Senator, for the question. Mr. President, what the government has done is to undertake an audit of the capacity of industry here in Australia to see if there is any capacity that may be able to be developed to produce vaccines using that technology. We have identified some companies in Australia who do have that capacity. We're currently in discussions with them to understand whether or not that capacity can be scaled up in the future, so that we do have onshore some sovereign capacity. Those conversations are continuing.
Senator Siewert, a final supplementary question.
Thank you. Could the Minister please outline who will be getting the Pfizer vaccines outlined in the strategy? I know there's 5 phases. Who, out of those 5 phases, will be getting the Pfizer vaccine?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks, Senator Siewert, for the question. The Pfizer vaccine, based on current supply projections, will be the first vaccine available to Australia and to Australians. So, therefore, the priority residents under our National Strategic Plan for the rollout of the vaccine will be the first ones to receive that vaccine. Mr. President, so we will be offering the vaccine across the country to all Australians through the hubs that will be managing the Pfizer vaccine, which is obviously those with low temperature capacity, and we will be rolling out the AstraZeneca vaccine and Moderna as it becomes available across the country, Mr. President. We are not specifying particular vaccine types to any particular cohort in the community. We are offering vaccine across the community,
Order.
Mr. President.
Senator
We are
Colbeck,
offering
time for the
vaccine
answer
across the
has
community.
expired. Senator Polley. Order. Senator Polley.
My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Senator Payne. The Morrison government will end JobKeeper in 52 days, and 60% of tourism businesses will go bust unless the Morrison government provides a lifeline. How many tourism jobs across Australia will be lost when the Morrison government turns off JobKeeper in March?
The Minister representing the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I thank Senator Polley for her question. As I have previously advised the chamber, what the government has done through a very, very difficult period of the COVID-19 pandemic is to provide record levels of economic support through a range of programs. JobKeeper in particular, small business cash payments of up to $100,000. And the outcomes of those payments have been to enable and sustain hundreds of thousands of tourism businesses across Australia and the jobs associated with them. And as part of our plan to support tourism recovery, as I've also previously advised
Senator
the chamber—
Polley, point of order.
Relevance. The Minister is not directly answering the question. She can try and scoot around it or put her own spin on it, but the question was very pointed.
I will. All right, sorry, can I just? There may be scooting, but I'll make that observation. Senator, I do allow opposition senators to occasionally restate questions, but I am going to draw the line at commentary before the restating of it comes. So, Senator Polley, I'll ask you to come to your point of order, which I got to direct relevance and scooting.
Well, it's about relevancy, Mr. President. The Morrison government is ending JobKeeper in 52 days, and 60% of tourism businesses are going to go bust. So how many jobs, Minister, are going to be lost? Are you going to abandon with your action
Senator
by
Polley,
cutting
it's not an
JobKeeper?
opportunity to add to the question. I'm listening to the minister carefully. In my view, if the minister is talking about support programs to the same sector very narrowly as she is, then I can't ask her in what terms to address the question, but I think she is talking about both employment and support programs to that sector. I will continue to listen carefully, and I've allowed you to re-emphasise your question, Senator Polley. Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Before Senator Polley took her point of order, I was going to remind the chamber that the government's approach in this vital sector, which we absolutely acknowledge, and in fact in my state of New South Wales, which has dealt consequentially with not just bushfires but with floods and then with pandemic issues which have clearly impacted the tourism industry. I cite the beautiful area of the Blue Mountains in particular. We are very focused on specific programs to support jobs and businesses in those areas and to support the maintenance and retention of those jobs in those areas. So, the Recovery for Regional Tourism Fund, Mr President, which is about boosting tourism in 9 regions which are heavily reliant on international tourism and, of course, welcome domestic tourism as well. I've been through the details of the applications even for those programs in my previous answers. I was going to say earlier to Senator Green, but sadly ran out of time, that under our Building Better Regions Fund, we have earmarked $100 million of specific funding for tourism infrastructure to assist those regions to boost the supply of new quality tourism infrastructure to drive visitation and to maintain jobs in the tourism industry in those regions. We are also, Mr President, providing $100 million.
Payne, I have Senator Polley on a point of order.
I'm taking a point of order, Mr President, on relevance. The minister is still not addressing the question about how many jobs are going to be lost when you cut off JobKeeper. Very simple.
Order. If the minister is talking— Oh, yes, Senator Payne.
Actually, what I am referring to in my response to Senator Polley's question is maintaining jobs in the sector in direct relevance and response to her question.
I was about to say something similar. If the minister is talking about employment in the sector and your question was about jobs in the sector, I can't direct the minister the terms in which to answer the question. You can debate it after question time. The minister is being directly relevant, and I think she had 5 seconds to answer. Or are we going to go to the supplementary question, Senator Polley? Supplementary.
Mr President, under the Regional Tourism Recovery Package, Tasmania is supposed to receive $13.5 million. 4 months after this announcement, how much money is actually being delivered to tourism operators in Tasmania?
Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I will take on notice the detail of the specific funding delivery to Tasmania, of course. But, in fact, Senator Polley has pointed to exactly one of the examples that I have used consistently this week in my answers to previous questions on this matter. Not just that program, Mr President, but the Building Better Regions Fund and $100 million for the Regional Recovery Partnerships Program, which is about coordinating that investment with other levels of government, local and state, to support both growth and recovery and to protect jobs, including in tourism, in 10 priority regions. Mr President, we have also through the COVID-19 Relief and Recovery Fund, included tourism-specific measures. For example, supporting Australia's exhibiting zoos and aquarium programs, $94.5 million for that program, a business events program supported with $50 million of Commonwealth funding, and of course many programs for the arts sector, which I would understand to be important in culturally rich Tasmania, Mr
Senator
President.
Payne. Senator Polley, a final supplementary question.
Why is Mr Morrison cutting JobKeeper and cutting wages but prioritising taxpayer-funded government advertising, sports rorts and flying his ex-minister around Europe with a private doctor to get a plum post-politics paycheck?
Order. I'll call Senator Payne when there's silence. Senator Payne.
Creativity and ingenuity in the opposition have decreased to such an extent that they are unable to provide a second supplementary to senators other than one that repeats the previous one. Notwithstanding that enormous challenge that those opposite are facing,
Polley
let
on a
me
point
say,
of order,
Mr.
Senator
President,
Payne. Senator Polley.
Yet again, the minister is not being relevant.
What is your point of order? Okay, Senator Polley.
That she's not being relevant to the question that I put to her.
Senator Polley, I've made the point before. The question contained a number of loaded political phrases. The minister The minister was, I would imagine, making a glancing observation and is entitled in some very wide latitude to address the terms and the assertions and the imputations in the question. So, Senator Payne, I'll call you to continue with the question.
Much, Mr. President, because of course I was specifically addressing the wording of Senator Polley's question and specifically pointing out to Senator Polley that what we have identified this week in the chamber are a number of programs with very specific tourism focus, which are separate from JobKeeper, which are separate from the political questions they are asking in that context, which are about protecting and maintaining jobs in tourism.
Senator Wong on a point of order.
The question goes to priorities. The point of order is relevance. The question goes to priorities, and while you're cutting JobKeeper and cutting wages, but spending money on advertising and a private
Senator
plane.
Wong, I understand. I heard Senator Payne say she concluded her answer, and Senator Payne has concluded her answer. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for the Environment, Senator Birmingham. I thank the Minister for making available the minutes of the last 3 PFAS task force meetings. Each of these minutes ends with a list of action items, which shows that in 2020 the task force achievements consisted of developing talking points and calling further meetings. Minister, can you point to one tangible achievement of the PFAS task force in 2020 towards remediation, compensation or like-for-like relocation of affected residents living outside of defence bases?
I'm going to the minister. You directed it to Senator Birmingham, but Senator Hume is the minister representing the Minister for the Environment, so I'm going to put the question to Senator Hume.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I thank Senator Roberts for his question. Our first priority with managing PFAS contamination has consistently been to ensure the well-being of affected communities. The Australian government acknowledges that communities in areas where PFAS contamination has been detected are very concerned about how this may affect them. We have a commitment to break the exposure pathways through treatment of water and soil, ensuring that residents have access to safe drinking water and preventing further contamination. The Defence PFAS program spend to date is approximately $433 million, which includes investigation, remediation and management activities. Defence has also provided $45 million to the other agencies in grants and transfers to enable research into health and remediation aspects. We continue to place a strong focus on the issue, with a further $83 million allocated for the financial year of 2020 and 2021. PFAS has been used in hundreds of industrial applications and consumer products such as carpeting, apparels, upholstery, food and paper wrappings, and firefighting foams and metal plating. Firefighting foams containing PFAS were a best-in-class product and used widely by the Department of Defence and other firefighting agencies across the globe. The Department of Defence uses firefighting foam products to protect human life and assets from emergency flammable liquid fires. Defence has leaned forward in managing the issue and has commenced detailed environmental investigations at 28 locations and has finalised 25. Defence is also committed to supporting local communities affected by PFAS contamination and has initiated the following actions: broken PFAS exposure pathways and reduced the mitigation of PFAS from Defence sites by providing alternative drinking water supplies to 478 properties, as well as installing or providing funding for 10 water treatment plants treating over 5.4 billion litres of water.
Order. Senator Roberts, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Instead of one achievement, I got a list of commitments, pathways, activities, spending, excuses and to-do lists. So let's move on to the second question. Minister, this week a new class action lawsuit was lodged by the Wreck Bay Aboriginal community over PFAS contamination to their traditional lands in Jervis Bay. Does the minister accept that the time to take action is now, before government inaction forces more everyday Australians caught in this nightmare are forced into courts?
Senator Hume.
Thank you, Senator Ross. Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank Senator Roberts for the question. The Jervis Bay issue is not one that I am familiar with. However, what I can tell you is that on the 5th of June, 2020, the Federal Court of Australia approved the settlement approval applications for the 3 class actions relating to the per and poly, oh goodness me, I'm just going to say it was a very long word, substance, the PFAS contamination in communities near the RAAF base in Williamstown, New South Wales, the Army Aviation Centre in Oakley, Queensland, and the RAAF base in Tyndall, New South Wales, the Northern Territory. On the 16th of June this last year, the court published its reasons. Defence Legal currently has 126 open, non-litigated claims and 3 litigated claims that are not class actions. On the 15th of April last year, a PFAS class action was filed in the federal court by Shine Lawyers in relation to property owners in delineated areas around defence bases in Pearce, in Richmond.
Order. Senator Hume. Senator Roberts, a final supplementary question.
When will the government begin offering compensation, remediation and like-for-like relocation of affected residents?
Senator Hume.
Thank you, Senator Roberts. What I can say is because the issue is currently being litigated, it's inappropriate to comment right now. As I said, on the 2nd of February 2021, this new PFAS class action was filed in the federal court by Shine Lawyers in relation to persons and entities with an interest in land situated in that delineated area around Jervis Bay and Wreck Bay, New South Wales. The first case management hearing has not yet been scheduled. As this is a matter for a court, we can really comment no further.
Senator Scarr.
Mr President, my question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne, who I note is in particularly good form today. Could the minister inform the Senate on the outcomes of the Pacific Islands Forum Leaders' Retreat?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I particularly thank Senator Scarr for this question because it was a great pleasure yesterday to join with Prime Minister Morrison the Pacific leaders for the special Pacific Island Forum Leaders' Retreat. And I particularly want to thank Tuvalu's Prime Minister, Natano, for his strong leadership as Forum Chair during a very, very difficult period with COVID-19. It was actually the first meeting of Pacific Island Forum leaders since the pandemic began and the first ever to be held virtually. Leaders considered 2 issues of vital importance to our Pacific family: our COVID-19 pandemic response and the appointment of a new Forum Secretary-General. Firstly, let me acknowledge and warmly welcome my friend Henry Puna, the former Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, as the new PIF Secretary-General. Australia looks forward to continuing our very warm and productive relationship with Mr Puna in his new role, and I also thank and acknowledge the great service of outgoing Secretary-General Dame Meg Taylor of Papua New Guinea, who has led the Forum with drive and with purpose over the last 6 years. Let me also acknowledge the other candidates, also friends of Australia, who put themselves forward, and thank them for their willingness to contribute in this role. Together, Pacific leaders, Mr President, have acted decisively to escape the worst health effects of COVID-19. The economic and the fiscal effects of the pandemic on the Pacific, however, have been significant. This week, leaders committed to working together towards sustainable economic recovery in our region, including restoring vital air and sea connectivity. Underpinning that, they emphasised the need for global cooperation on the critical issue of equitable and affordable access to vaccines. Leaders made clear their objective for full vaccine coverage for all Pacific countries and committed to working together to ensure timely and equitable distribution of vaccines across our region.
Senator Scarr, a supplementary question.
Could the minister advise the Senate on how Australia will work in partnership with the Pacific Islands Forum and members to progress those outcomes?
Senator Payne.
Mr President, Pacific Islands Forum members will continue to work closely together to safely support the vital Pacific humanitarian pathway on COVID-19, which is ensuring the movement of essential supplies and personnel, and then to enable people to move safely as economic recovery grows. That's tourists, it's more Pacific workers, it's students, it's family members. It's essential for our shared economic recovery. We're working in a partnership with our Pacific friends to support continued operation of the aviation sector in the vast blue Pacific continent. It's an essential underpinning for economic recovery and to support safe travel. And importantly, I'm pleased to inform the Senate that leaders also endorsed Australia's proposal for a formal annual meeting of Pacific women leaders as part of the PIF program, adding to meetings of foreign ministers, trade ministers, economic ministers and so on. It's added to the formal forum meeting agenda. It will drive even stronger political focus on gender equality.
Senator Scarr, a final supplementary question.
Will the minister advise the Senate on Forum leaders' consideration of Pacific Island countries' access to a safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine?
Senator Payne.
Thank you, Mr President. Of course, leaders were focused on emphasising the critical importance of productive partnerships for timely and equitable distribution of vaccines. And the government's Regional Vaccine Access and Health Security Initiative will contribute very positively in this objective. We announced formally that Australia will support Pacific Island countries to achieve full population coverage with safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines. That will contribute strongly to our important regional partnership on vaccines and was very warmly welcomed by leaders. Senator Seselja and I have been discussing Australia's commitments individually with respective leaders across the Pacific over the last month. It will also build on Australia's contribution to the Global COVAX Facility Fund for developing countries, facilitating delivery of more than 1 million doses to Pacific Island countries by the middle of this year. Our package is end-to-end. It includes helping secure doses, technical support for safe and effective vaccine rollout, including supply chain distribution, assessments of vaccine safety, efficacy and quality, and capacity building for health workforces.
The answer has expired. Senator Waters.
Thanks very much, President. My question's to the Leader of the Government representing the Prime Minister. The Independent Climate Targets Panel recently found that so much of our carbon budget has been spent. Australia would need to double our 2030 targets to at least a 50% reduction by 2030 to do our fair share of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees. Is the government still committed to limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees? And if so, will you accept the Climate Targets Panel findings and increase Australia's 2030 targets before President Biden's climate summit on April the 22nd?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks very much, Mr President. I thank Senator Waters for her question. The government is indeed committed to the objectives of the Paris Agreement, to which we are a signatory, which include targets in relation to limits on global warming. We, of course, look forward to working cooperatively with other nations in relation to the work towards those targets, to doing as Australia has done time and time again, and that is to meet and exceed the commitments that we have made. And in relation to the Paris Agreement, we have made 2030 commitments commensurate with that agreement, and all indications and analysis show that we are on track to once again meet and exceed those targets. As senators may be aware, Prime Minister Morrison and President Biden spoke earlier today in a warm conversation, canvassing a number of different issues, including cooperation in relation to matters of climate change. And indeed, the government looks forward to receiving further details about the Biden administration summit and to formulating our participation in that summit once we have received those further details. So, Mr President, our position is certainly one of continuing to invest, as we have, in the technologies and pathways to achieve reductions. It's investment by Australian businesses, Australian households, Australian industry and Australian governments that have put Australia in a position that sees the uptake of renewable energy in this country leading much of the rest of the world, that has delivered reductions in emissions ahead of the OECD averages over a period of time. And it's through continued investment that we will achieve the technological breakthroughs that enable us to move beyond the types of successes being seen in relation to energy generation into the other spheres of emissions that need to be tackled to be able to achieve more ambitious targets into the future. That's why we've made a $1.9 billion investment package into future low-emissions technologies, and why we look forward to working with partners like the United States in delivering on that package.
Senator Birmingham. Senator Waters, a supplementary question.
Thanks, President. Given the views expressed on social media by Mr Craig Kelly, Senator Rennick and other Liberal backbenchers, does the Prime Minister have confidence in the Bureau of Meteorology?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, the government indeed has confidence in the Bureau of Meteorology, in the CSIRO, in our agencies who provide advice and information to government, in the agencies whose analysis has demonstrated that Australia has not only met and exceeded the commitments we made under the first Kyoto period or under the second Kyoto commitment period, but that we're on track to meet and exceed the commitments we've made under the Paris Agreement. And I realise that these are facts that are inconvenient truths for the Australian Greens, if I can use that phrase. But the evidence is very clear that Australia has achieved what many other nations have not to date, and that is to be able to, within our country, through domestic action, be able to meet and exceed the commitments that we have made. And the investments that our government is making is about ensuring that we maintain that track record of success and delivery into the future.
Order. There's a little bit too much background noise. I was struggling to hear the minister. Senator Waters, a final supplementary question.
Thanks, President. Does the Prime Minister accept the evidence given by the Bureau of Meteorology to a recent Senate Estimates Committee that under current targets, Australia is currently on track for up to 4.4 degrees of warming by the end of this century?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. Well, I've learned a lot of things in my time in this place, and one is to make sure that when questions like that are framed, that it's always best to go and check the full context in which such analysis might have been given and such questions may have been answered.
Waters, I have Senator Birmingham. I have Senator Waters on a point of order.
Point of order, President. I can read the quote out from the Bureau if the Minister requires.
That's not a point of order, Senator Waters. I'll call the Minister to continue. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. Clearly, it depends upon the type of assumptions that are being talked about, and obviously, in relation to climate science, as I said before, we follow the evidence. In relation to the work of the Bureau and other agencies looking at projections of what outcomes may occur, a huge driving part of that relates not just to what Australia does, but to what the rest of the world does in terms of their emissions profile as well. That's the driving reason behind our investment in technologies, because how you shift the whole world's emissions profile is how you actually tackle this issue, and you do it by achieving technological breakthroughs that ensure every country embraces low emissions technologies, not just those who might be able to afford.
Senator Ayres.
Thanks, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Industrial Relations, Senator Payne. How will cutting the wages of thousands of Australian workers help the economic recovery when wages growth is already at record lows?
The Minister representing the Minister for Industrial Relations, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I think Senator Birmingham and I in the Broad have responded to this question today. The government has had in place a very strong system of support for Australian businesses, for Australian employers over the period of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's support, Mr. President, that was absolutely essential during the worst periods of the pandemic. But importantly, Mr. President, there needs to be a path beyond the worst periods of the pandemic in 2020 and through 2021. And so the government, in planning and in reviewing its position, will work very carefully with employers, with industry, with employer organisations, as it has done, in fact, right through the pandemic period, as we make those decisions. Most importantly, though, Mr. President, we'll make them responsibly and thoughtfully and in a considered fashion, not, though, as we might have seen from those opposite.
Senator Ayres, a supplementary question.
Can the Minister confirm that Schedule 3, Part 5, Clause 19 of the Morrison government's own industrial relations legislation allows for a wage cut?
Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I thank Senator Ayres for turning my attention to Schedule 3, Part 5, Clause 19 of the legislation. And I don't have that particular part of the legislation with me, Mr. President. But what I can confirm is that the campaign that those opposite are running, a campaign against a bill that is about adapting our successful JobKeeper flexibilities, that is about reforms in the bill that allow employers and employees in sectors to work together, that enable employers to have more flexible arrangements. Those decisions, Mr President, are ones which the government has made in broad consultation, many of those consultations held by the Minister for Industrial Relations last year, but those opposite are completely opposed to any engagement on those grounds. And, Mr President, we reject that premise. And the government's plan is clear, and the government's plan is founded in a strong confidence in Australia's future.
I'll give you an opportunity to conclude. I have Senator Ayres on a point of order.
Point of order's relevance. The question was very straightforward. I understand the minister doesn't have her own industrial relations legislation in front of her, but the question was, does the provision allow for a wage cut?
Not having it in front of me myself either, Senator Ayres, the minister, from my hearing of her answer, was talking about that issue. I can't, and issues that I would consider directly relevant to it. I'll call her. I think she had 5 seconds left to continue. I've allowed you to restate the specific nature of your question. Oh, the minister has nothing else to add. Senator Ayres, a supplementary question. Sorry. Yep.
When the Morrison government removes the test that requires enterprise bargaining agreements to be better off overall, doesn't that mean that workers don't have to be better off overall?
Senator Payne.
Mr President, it's very clear to us, very clear to Australians who hear the mantra of those opposite, that there are a number of false claims being made about the proposed changes to the Better Off Overall test to the boot under the enterprise bargaining framework. For example, the claim that we're removing the boot. That's not correct. The Industrial Relations Reform Bill does not remove the Better Off Overall text. It continues to apply to each individual, current and prospective employee to ensure that they are left better off overall under an enterprise agreement compared to the relevant modern award. Are we allowing each employer to now ignore the Better Off Overall test? No, we are not, Mr President. One of the proposed changes builds upon the existing public interest exception in the Fair Work Act, which was, of course, introduced by Labor. These changes are a temporary measure that allows the Fair Work Commission to approve some agreements that don't pass the boot in limited circumstances to support workplaces that have been negatively impacted by COVID-19 and where their employees and representatives agree
to do so. Time for the answer has expired. Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Resources, Water and Northern Australia, Senator Ruston. Can the Minister update the Senate on the important contribution of the resources sector to our economy, particularly in rural and regional Australia, and what risks threaten the sector's continued economic contribution to our country?
Order. The Minister representing the Minister for Resources, Water and Northern Australia, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Canavan for his question and his very, very strong interest and advocacy on behalf of our very important resources sector. Because, like the rest of the Morrison-McCormack government, we understand what a huge role that the resources sector plays in creating jobs, especially in rural and regional Australia. It's an absolute pillar of our economic prosperity, and it is crucial because it employs more than 264,000 Australians, hard-working Australians. And our coal exports contribute $43.8 billion to the Australian economy last year alone. And these export earnings, they help to pay for the infrastructure that we need, the hospitals, the schools and all of the things that Australians are so obviously rely on. And the sector is absolutely critical for our economic prosperity, and it has been absolutely steadfast in its contribution to our economic recovery as we recover from the COVID pandemic. But yes, Senator Canavan, there are some very significant risks to this sector, and in front of us right now there are risks by those that sit opposite and their state colleagues in the Queensland government. And the recent High Court decision in relation to the Acland mine in the Darling Downs region of Queensland has exposed exactly that and the Queensland government's failures to support the resource sector in that state. I mean, New Hope have been battling for 5 years to try and resolve the planning approvals for the expansion of that mine. And I'll quote New Hope's chief executive when he said, "What we need from the government, the Queensland government, is a roadmap for how we get this project up and running, because more delays equates to more job losses." It is absolutely essential that this world-class operator, the kind of operator that we want operating in Australia, is able to get on with with the job of making investments and creating jobs for Australians.
Senator Canavan, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm glad the minister referred to the Acland mine, because there are 500 jobs there at risk, thanks to the twiddling of their thumbs of the Queensland government. And can the minister outline how project delays threaten jobs in regional Queensland?
Senator Ruston.
Well, thank you very much. And indeed, Senator Canavan, it is the kind of lack of support that we've seen from the Queensland government around the support of this mine that has seen New Hope in the position it does because of the lack of support for our resources sector. New Hope originally lodged their application to expand this mine site in 2007, and it is still waiting for that approval. So you don't need to be Einstein to understand that the Queensland government does not support these sorts of projects in Queensland. And as you said, Senator Canavan, 500 direct jobs will be created by the extension of this particular mine. And New Hope, unfortunately, was forced to make 150 workers redundant on the back of the fact that they were not able to get the approvals to extend this mine. And Minister Pitt yesterday said, workers trying to plan their lives around the mine's future are now back to square one. How on earth can that be helping the COVID recovery and the people of Queensland who deserve our help in getting jobs?
Ruston. Senator Canavan, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can the minister also advise why it is so important to ensure that coal jobs remain in regional Queensland?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Well, clearly a secure and stable coal industry is going to be something that is going to support regional Queensland. It supports regional Australia, and it's absolutely critical in job creation and economic prosperity, but particularly, Senator Canavan, in rural and regional Australia. Unfortunately, in the case of this particular mine site, the new Acland mine highlights that Labor is particularly erratic when it comes to any commentary it makes about the resources sector. Those opposite need to stand up for the resource sector, and I thank those of them that do. But you talk the talk, but you do not walk the talk. What we need is a united and demonstrated fight for the people who live in our rural and regional areas who need the jobs that are created by projects such as this. You need to stop walking both sides of the street. You can't have a policy for inner-city suburbs and a different policy when you actually get out there in the regions where these jobs really matter, the livelihoods of individuals really matter. And yes, I've been there, Senator Watt.
Senator Sterle.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Home Affairs, Senator Reynolds. In response to the West Australian Government's decision to protect its citizens against a deadly COVID-19 strain by instituting a 5-day lockdown, Minister for Home Affairs Mr Dutton attacked Premier McGowan, saying the decision was, and I quote, "not a realistic approach, that it was politically motivated and that it would send businesses broke." Is this the position of the Morrison government?
Minister representing the Minister for Home Affairs, Senator Reynolds.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and I really have no additional input. I think Minister Dutton's words speak for themselves.
Order. Order. Senator Sterle, a supplementary question.
He hasn't got a written answer, that's it. I'm nearly speechless. Okay, all right. Okay, yeah, Mr. President, I do have a supplementary.
Order. Order.
Roberts will help you out. Can I start again?
Senator
I didn't
Sterle,
see your
please
lips move
continue.
then, Mr. President.
I'll use my discretion from the chair. Please continue.
Premier McGowan has pointed out that the federal government has abdicated their responsibility for federal quarantine, saying, and I quote, "It has fallen to the states to perform the role that Mr Dutton should be performing under the Constitution." Minister, isn't Premier McGowan right?
Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much. And look, I thank Senator Sterle for that question. I think there's some misunderstandings on both sides of the rabbit-proof fence here on this issue. The ABF has legislative responsibilities for the Custom and Migration Acts to clear people travelling from overseas. From that point, the responsibility for passengers passes to state and territories for quarantine and onwards domestic travel as relevant. National Cabinet, including Premier McGowan, agreed to create hotel quarantine programs from the 27th of March this year. All First Ministers, including Premier McGowan agreed to this. So this should come as no surprise, given this arrangement has been agreed by the WA State Government since the 27th of March this year.
Senator Sterle, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Western Australia has taken in more than their fair share of stranded Australians returning home. Why are Mr Morrison's ministers from the eastern states attacking the hard work of Western Australians in stepping up when his government has stepped away?
Senator Reynolds. Senator Reynolds.
Have a look around you. Have a look around you.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Sterle for that question. I'm surprised he couldn't even keep a straight face when he was asking that question. He's still laughing at the hypocrisy of that question. In March the 27th, all First Ministers agreed to these quarantine hotel arrangements. Hotels, nobody bullies you, Senator Sterle. But in all seriousness, the state government agreed in March to these arrangements. The government has looked very seriously at this issue, and hotels remain the best possible place for quarantine because people have individual rooms, they have their own facilities, and that is where the health and all of the other wraparound support is located.
Order.
So it is very
Senator
clearly
Keneally.
the right place to be.
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I ask that further questions be placed on notice.